guys notice that there has been a bit of a change brewing in the function of the Cleveland Browns organization and how they operate? See, I've been noticing this for the last couple of weeks, that we've been hearing more and more noise about different changes happening here and there. It's really been happening the latter half of the season, and it's been happening over the last couple of years. See, last year, Andrew Berry had a couple of interesting quotes. He really laid down the future in that postseason press conference, because he said a phrase that I said last week and made a video about: strategic pivot, right? Another thing he said was that I see myself as the steward of the Cleveland Browns. That was also a very interesting quote, because if you look up what the steward of something is, right, the definition of that, it is a person who looks after the passengers on a ship or a train and brings them meals, a person responsible for the supplies of food. It basically means somebody who, while they don't own it, they control it, right? That is basically the gist of that phrase and how it's used popularly. And he used that phrase last year, and I always thought that was an interesting phrase. The steward of the Cleveland Browns. Now, if you know how the Browns structure is, they hired Kevin Stefanski in 2020. And then after they hired Kevin Stefanski, they hired Andrew Berry. Andrew Berry was hired after Kevin Stefanski. Now, they felt like they both would work together, but it was Kevin that had a little bit more control than Andrew. It was Kevin that ownership was more likely to default to than Andrew. But over the last couple of years, who have you been seeing next to Jimmy Haslam? It's always Andrew Berry. Interesting, right? It's very, very interesting. Now, there is a show that I'm going to compare this to. It is a show that you don't hear people talk about as much anymore, because the guy who played the main character turned out to be a terrible human. Right? But House of Cards is the show that I'm referencing. And see, in House of Cards, a character by the name of Frank Underwood, who again is played by somebody who is accused of things that, if true, make him an absolute piece of shit. You can look that up on your own time. Me explaining that is beyond the purview of this video, but if he is guilty of what he's been accused of, he's a piece of shit. But Frank Underwood, the character in House of Cards, starts the series off as a majority whip in the United States Congress, which means he is a senator who gets the votes together, basically. Like, a whip is people who get people in line with the party values. So he's a senator. He gets the other senators in line. If the president needs 51 votes, that's what Frank Underwood does. He does the dirty work as the whip of the party. And Frank Underwood in this show finds a way to play politics in the background and maneuver himself, as far as power is concerned, well enough that he gets to the point to where he becomes the vice president of the United States without a vote cast in his name. And then he becomes the president of the United States without winning a single election. He maneuvers, pulls a lever here, gets a lever there. He just finds a way to consolidate all of this power and become president. Andrew Berry is doing something similar. Now, I don't know if Andrew Berry is manipulating things behind the scenes or, trying to maneuver things, but he has become the recipient of a lot of power because of how things have ended in Cleveland. See, Kevin Stefanski is about to get fired. Now, that was the guy who was on the hiring committee for Andrew Berry when Andrew Berry got fired. But Kevin Stefanski is about to get fired soon. Everything leaking tells you he's about to get fired. And because of the run game staleness, the staleness of the offense, Kevin's on his way out, which means there's one person off the list. Earlier this year, another person who was on that hiring committee for Andrew Berry, right? Because it was Kevin, it was Dee Podesta, and it was Jimmy Haslam that hired him. Paul Dee Podesta gets the job as the president of baseball operations for the Colorado Rockies, taking him off the board. Now it's just Andrew Berry at the top of the organization. You might not know this, but Andrew Berry, his title is Vice President of Football Operations, not technically the general manager. We just call him the GM because he has the power of a GM, but he's VP of Football Operations. Now, the structure that was put in place has been changed because one name's about to be out and another name is about to be gone. So for a while, from 2020 to about now, until they fired Kevin Stefanski, we were in the Stefanski-Berry era. And there was a specific reason why we called it the Stefanski-Berry era, was because this was an era defined by the co-leadership of Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry. We are now walking into the Andrew Berry era. And there are some concerns with that, and there are some things to be excited about with that. But no doubt, Andrew Berry has truly found a way to become the steward of the Cleveland Browns. We'll talk about this more in just a second. I gotta thank my sponsor, Sleep. Real quick, just want to let you guys know Sleeper has a new offer here. They're offering a free $20 entry, no deposit required. And also, if you're a first-time user, you also will receive a 100% match on up to $100 when you use the promo code Worst Take. Again, $20 free, no deposit required. Plus, first-time users also receive a 100% deposit match up to $100. Join Sleeper. So we are weeks away from entering the Andrew Berry era, where it seems like Andrew Berry is going to have most of the control for what the Browns are going to want to do, most of the vision. Basically, he is becoming the Cleveland Browns version of Howie Roseman. Now, some people might be excited about that. Some people might be very concerned about that, but that is where things are headed. Jimmy Haslam has a lot of different teams that he owns now. He has his hand in a lot of different pots. He's not going to be as involved as he was in the early 2010s with the Cleveland Browns because he doesn't have the time to be as involved with the Cleveland Browns. He's managing a lot of stuff, a lot of other stuff, and he's also managing building that new stadium in Brook Park. So Jimmy's going to be hands off for a little while, right? Kevin's not going to be there. Dee Podesta's not going to be there. They're hiring a replacement for Kevin, but Andrew's going to be in charge of that process. In Dee Podesta, they're not looking to hire a replacement for Dee Podesta. Basically, Jimmy is saying, I found the guy I want to run the organization. You know, I found my filter for the organization in Andrew Berry. Now, there's some good things with this. I think Andrew Berry's last 3 drafts have been very promising. 2023 is underrated, especially when you consider the undrafted free agent class where he got 2 starters and Ronnie Hickman and Mahmoud Diabate on top of drafting Alex Wright. I think his and Martin Emerson. I think his 2024 class is pretty good. You know, DeJuan Jones was a starter for this team for a while. You get Isaiah McGuire, who I think has been really good for this team. I think there's some undrafted free agents that pop in that class as well. And then obviously this 2025 class, the first class where he has had true draft assets since 2021, was phenomenal. Right. So the drafting is there. And with Andrew Berry, he's always been a extremely solid pro personnel guy. Throughout Andrew Berry's 5-6 off seasons as Cleveland Browns GM, his pro personnel decision making, his pro personnel structure of the management, the roster has been really solid. Now there is a question of what do you do to reconcile with the Deshaun Watson trade and the damage that trade did. Ultimately, they all three take credit for it, so they all three have to take some level of blame for it. But the Deshaun Watson trade, that definitely threw a monkey wrench in things. And when you look at the flaws on the Cleveland Browns roster, the lack of offensive line play and the lack of wide receiver play, Andrew Berry kind of gets an excuse from that because that's where the resources were depleted from in order to build other things. So like the Browns spent a lot of money on offense with Deshaun Watson, and because they did it with the assumption that Deshaun Watson would be good enough to make up for it. He wasn't, so you just kind of got left with scraps there, right? Like it is what it is on the offensive side of the ball. Here's what I know. When Andrew Berry focuses his money, whatever side of the ball he focuses his money on, whatever problem he focuses his money on or the draft picks on, it gets fixed. He came here, his focus was to fix the offensive line first. The Browns in 2019 went from a pretty shitty offensive line to the best offensive line in the NFL. Then his focus after fixing the offensive line went to fixing the defense. The Browns defense in 2020, in 2021, and 2022 were pretty bad. The focus went to fixing the defense. The Browns were able to fix the defense and build it into one of the best units in the NFL. You're starting to see a common theme here. Wherever the focus of the assets that Andrew Berry has to spend are going, usually not only end up getting fixed, but end up being at a level to where they're one of the better units in the NFL. Happened with the offensive line, happened with the defensive line, and now it's time to put those resources back into the offensive line. I think Andrew Berry has proven that he's good at his job at GM. You can have things that you don't like about how he operates, but I think he has been pretty objectively good at his job. Could he be better? Sure, but I don't think he's bad at his job. But there are some things to be concerned about. What would a less filtered Andrew Berry look like? So far, his decisions have really gone through the filter of Kevin Stefanski, have gone through the filter of other members of the organization. Andrew will be in charge of this show. He is the filter now, right? Like, how does that change what decisions are being made, who he listens to more, and what kind of decisions they end up making? My big concern with Andrew is Andrew likes to take PR risk to better the football team. Like, he has done this multiple times where he does not care about the negative public relations hit that the Browns might take in order to improve how good the Browns could be. He brought in Kadarius Toney last year. He brought in Isaiah Bond after he has done this a lot, right? Will that be a tendency that gets worse and more emboldened as he gets more power with the organization? Another thing is the secrecy for things that don't really require secrecy. Right? It seems like the Browns sometimes engage in secrecy for secrecy's sake. Now, look, this doesn't seem like Kevin was like one of the people telling Andrew Berry he needs to be release more information to the public. But we do know that Andrew Berry and Kevin both had that in agreement that they were going to try to be as much as a walled garden as possible. And without Kevin there, right, there's less people to keep that in check, and I don't think Kevin did a very good job of keeping that in check. Honestly, I wonder if the vagueness on injury stuff changes with Kevin gone, because maybe he was the driving force behind it. But I have to imagine Andrew was involved here too. I wonder if that problem gets worse when Andrew Berry has more power, or gets better with Kevin out the picture. I could see arguments for both why that would be different, but I'm going to hope it gets better, but I'm going to expect it gets worse because Andrew Berry is one of the most secretive people in the NFL. It's a long-standing meme. Whenever I hear any kind of like report about what Andrew Berry is going to do, it just makes me feel like that's absolutely not what the Browns are going to do, because Andrew Berry works like this from my evaluation of him over 5 years. And I think I've been able to have a decent handle on being able to guess what Andrew Berry does. Relying on sources with a guy like Andrew Berry, relying on inside information with a guy like Andrew Berry is, I think, a, how do I put this kind? I think relying on sources when it comes to stuff that involves Andrew Berry has proven to be more troublesome than it's worth, because whatever information is out there about Andrew Berry is usually out there for design, and it usually means that information is not reliable. Case in point, right? All the noise about Travis Hunter last year, I bought into it, and turned out that they were always interested in trading that pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars, and that they were pumping up that pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like, stuff like that's why you really can't trust what you hear from sources about Andrew Berry. I've learned over the years that the best way to predict Andrew Berry is just to dig deep into his processes, right? I think Jack Duffin has done a great job at this. It's just like figuring out what Andrew's processes are and being able to predict what Andrew's going to do by just looking at his process, because Andrew Berry is a man of process, right? He does things out of process. He always talks about the process. He's a process-oriented guy. He's going to have some things that show patterns over time, right? How he likes to attack different positions, how he likes to get value, how he likes to structure trade. These things all follow some patterns that you can kind of find a path to be like, oh, if the Browns are going to do this, then these things make sense. It makes more sense to study Andrew Berry, to predict Andrew Berry, than to try to hear what Andrew Berry's thinking based on sources. So that's another thing that is going to be there, right? If you're somebody who you don't trust that kind of research, when people are looking at processes, breaking it down and trying to reverse engineer it to try to predict what's going on, and that's a lot of what I do on this channel, right? I try to pay attention to how these people operate and then try to break down based on how they've operated, how they'll operate in the future. Again, process oriented, right? If you're somebody who needs the inside source, or you need Mary Kay to tell you how to feel about what's going on, then you're going to be kind of in the fog again, because Andrew Berry again keeps it locked down. These are just the caveats of having him, for better or worse. This is what we're leaning into. And you can ask the question of whether this is good for the Browns, because Andrew Berry's record as a general manager certainly hasn't been good enough for you to just feel home run great about this decision. But I do think that if you evaluate what the alternative is, which is Jimmy Haslam getting on the phone with Jimmy Sexton and starting another coaching search, which is my greatest fear in life, right before you got to pick to take a quarterback. If you look at that alternative, I'd much rather have Andrew Berry running the ship, because I think Andrew Berry has proven to be a competent general manager. Is he going to have some growing pains as the steward of the franchise? I think so. Everybody will. But I think he will make competent decisions that keep in mind what the Browns have already drafted and already tried to build, I think is something to pay attention to. But the reality is that the closer we get towards the end of the season, the closer we're getting towards the likely firing of Kevin Stefanski, and the more and more this organization is going to be shaped in the vision of Andrew Berry. And to his credit, I think he has gotten to this place because he has been good at his job. Again, just let's follow the money here, right? Wherever the focus is for the organization at that time to improve over a 2-3 year plan, those improvements not only happen, but they become really, really good in those areas. Again, he got here, offensive line needed to be fixed. They fixed the offensive line. They were building a defense around Baker. They put offensive around Baker. They put some pieces on offense. They spent the next 2 years developing the defense because the defense needed to be fixed after 2020. They not only fixed the defense, it's the strength for the team now. You can say what you want about Andrew, but he's fixed some problems here in Cleveland. And now that he has his full allotment of draft assets, he has a chance to maybe even get a quarterback in this draft. I'm interested to see what that vision becomes. I think there's a chance that we can make some good decisions here and finally get this thing where we've always wanted it to be. But if it's going to happen this offseason, it's going to happen under Andrew Berry's watch. And most importantly, if it doesn't happen this offseason, it's going to happen under Andrew Berry's watch, because that's who's in charge now. There is a new boss in town. It had been Stefanski and Andrew Berry sharing that responsibility, basically both being EVPs of football ops for the last 4 years, 5 years actually. But now that's over as we inch more and more close to Kevin being fired. How do you feel about that? Let me know in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.